Well, thank you once again for joining us on this video series as we go through the book, What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer by Skye Jethani. And just before we move in, we just, if you've been enjoying these videos, getting something out of them, encouraging you in a lot of different ways, please like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. But we're just going to move right into it here. And so we're on video 15. We're just going to briefly kind of hit chapter 36. We didn't do that because we kind of wanted to let that be the lead into what will be part 4, which is then deals with, so we're dealing with chapter 36, then moving to part 4, which is 40, 41, and 42. And so chapter 36, then prayer is also a discipline of self-awareness. Then 40, then confession is how we shatter our illusions about ourselves. 41, then we cannot hide our true self from God. 42, then hiding our sin will disrupt our prayers more than the sin itself will. So again, one of the kind of the goals we've talked about with the idea of what we want in our prayer life is living a life with God, or we've used the word a life in communion with God. And it's really important as we talk about and unpack communion and maybe take away sort of the church word of it, because we have an idea of communion, and usually it's a part of a service, depending on what kind of background you're from, it can look a little different. But what we're talking about is relationship. Mm-hmm. And very much as we've talked a lot about becoming aware of God and his presence, it's also become aware of God and also aware of ourselves and bringing our true self into the presence of God, which is a really important part when we talk about living a life with God and in communion with God, is that we are bringing our true selves into the presence of God.
Mm-hmm. And last time we talked about the prayer of examine, and that's where it comes from a Latin word meaning to reveal the truth based on the scale, or we're getting that balance there, which is the truth about what's happening. And so really this type of prayer is not about self-examination, although that is part of it, which we're talking about today, but it's really more about revealing the truth in us so that we can be honest in our relationship with God.
Yeah, and it's really about welcoming him into every part of our lives, mm-hmm. not just the Sunday morning church service part or the whatever mm-hmm. set aside. It's every part.
Yeah, and that's I think that's sometimes difficult for us to sometimes even imagine, let alone do. In that, I know that part of the prayer that I've been praying is more of a structured prayer, and we did talk about that recently in a video. And it talks about having surrender, and that's really part of what this is about. Is allowing God into every part of our lives. Where I spend my money, what my thought life is about, how I treat my kids and my family and those outside my family, all those kinds of things, where sometimes we really like to hold on to certain parts of our life. And I think this is really about opening up and letting God into every part.
Exactly. And I mean, and David would tell his son, when it comes to serving faithfully, or to serve faithfully, because in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9, he says, the Lord searches all our hearts, mm-hmm. All of it, it's like every part, and understands every plan and thought. And
he knows.
David, yeah, that's right. And David, even about himself, says, "Oh Lord, you have searched me. You search me, and you know me." Psalms 139:1.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is about cooperating with him, inviting him into both the good and the bad. And it's important that we do talk about both.
Both, yeah. I think for me personally, I tend to focus on the good. I can see where I tend to think of myself as probably better than I am, and it's not that I don't feel guilt or shame over things I might have done, but lots of times it's my the things that I don't necessarily think about, my intentions, my thoughts, where I've held back from saying what I really think, kind of stuff, and I can really downplay that sort of bad side, and I really need God to reveal those things to me and that's the prayer of examine when I review my day, to show me the things that where I might just look at the goal. This is where I was good today. This is where I really hit the nail on the head, and I did this good thing and this good thing, and that kind of overshadows the part that might not be so good. And I need to, for me anyway, I need God to reveal those things to me where I might need some correction.
Yeah, and for me, as much as I absolutely can struggle with those same things and do and have, and I'm sure will continue to, another thing for me is that I can be the opposite end, and I can be overly hard on myself, and be almost aware of every time I've missed the mark, or I feel like I've failed, or and I can be unfairly hard on myself. So I also need to be reminded that God wants to reveal the good, because sometimes that's where I'm failing to see. And so that's why I really think it's good when it comes to self-awareness. Absolutely, we need to have him reveal those things that we kind of want to hide. Those things
definitely needs to be both. Yes.
Yeah, but we also if anyone in there is somewhat like me, who definitely struggles with that other one, but also struggles with needing to be reminded where the good is as well.
Yeah,
I think it's really important. That is self-awareness. It is not just realizing where you fail. It's also realizing where you've seen growth.
Yeah.
And growing is happening. And I think that's really important, that we sort of, again, the idea of self-awareness is good and bad, or so the good and the bad, and God revealing all of those things. As we move on to part 4, because it is a bit more of a focus, and the reason we have to focus on, because this is definitely a thing I can safely say we probably all do it to some degree. We do like to misdirect into the idea of like, hey, look at the good side of things. And so part 4, kind of is looking at the parable Jesus would tell in Luke 18, 9 to 14, about a Pharisee and a tax collector who go to a temple. One, the Pharisee who's boastful, and the other, the tax collector, who is humble, which is again kind of playing on the idea of, they would think that the Pharisee is going to be the one closer to God, and it's the tax collector, the one who's far from God, but it really roles reverse there. And one is boastful, because they did a lot of right things, but it was the humble one who was honest in his messiness that Jesus said would be exalted and justified.
Yeah, and I think Skye really makes the good point here that it's the importance of confession.
That's right.
It's not just listing all the good things you did, or even listing all the bad things you did. It's really confessing that you may have missed the mark, and even if you did the right thing, you may have not done it with the right intention, or you might have done it to get attention. And so we sometimes sidestep the actual confession part.
Well, and I think it's really important, because I would say in a lot of times that we're kind of a mixed bag of motives, and that it's really easy to, as you say, like confess maybe where there was that little bit of confession where the motive was good, but there was that other part where it's like, yeah, it was still about me too, and confessing, maybe there's some selfishness sometimes involved in the things that we do. Confession is important, because I think it's definitely, and Skye talks about it, it is something I think we can sidestep the idea of confession. Like, there are definitely things that we built on. There's certain theologies, Jesus' death on the cross is sufficient to cover sins. Therefore, there's a fear that the practice of confession somehow might diminish the cross in some way. Or things like, hey, God has already forgiven all the sins on the cross, so confession is more of an attempt to earn God's forgiveness when we've already got it. Yeah. And we need to really understand that it is, the benefit of confession is not God's. The benefit is us, in that it can change our hearts.
That was just revolutionary. I mean, it shouldn't be revolutionary to me, but I think you sometimes just need to be reminded of the obvious. God isn't standing there with a big stick saying, confess your sins, you bad person. What he really wants is the best for us. He wants us to grow and be transformed. That's right. And the only way that's really going to happen is if we're honest with ourselves and with him.
Yeah, and I love that. It's admitting when things in our life are not like Jesus. and having maybe some illusions shattered, but it's all about allowing God to bring growth into those areas. And I think that's just a big part, which moves us into like chapter 41, and really the whole idea there is that we can't hide our true selves from God. And something that really hit me in this chapter was actually this quote: when we feel the need to manufacture a facade of piety in our prayers, it isn't because we are afraid God will not accept us, but because we cannot accept ourselves. And that led me to the whole thought of like, God sees us no matter what. So the only person we're really fooling is ourselves and maybe just the people around us.
Yep. And I think that's actually pretty hard hitting in that. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes we like to take advantage of, say, the pre-written prayers where we can say them in a way that makes us sound like we're very pious or holy.
Yeah.
Or we'll I know I've often mentioned a person in the church that was sometimes asked to pray publicly in our church services, and he was a really great prayer, and he sounded very pious and holy. And I'm not judging him; I don't really know him in that way, but I know that he was well respected because he could say those words, and we realize that that's really not what it's all about.
No, not at all. And then again, if we go back to Psalms as a model, I mean, David models in a lot of his Psalms honesty, and talking about, not just the good, but also the real ugly.
Yep.
And we're not hiding anything from God. It's really in prayer, God is giving us the chance to be real.
To be real, yes. So I like what C.S. Lewis said there is that we must lay before him what is actually in us, not what we think ought to be in us.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this leads us really nicely into chapter 42, which I think is a really important part, and probably the thing we don't talk enough about, or at least in my background, I don't think I heard enough of, and that is that sometimes it's the hiding of the sin, that is more disruptive than the sin itself. Like that's a pretty interesting thing. Like, cause we think we're just trying, it's the sin that's keeping us back, when it's our way of just not really being authentic, which is something that's plaguing our world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's really what's keeping any sort of distance, if you will, anything is really our want to hide it, not necessarily the sin in and of itself, because what brings us closer is when we actually admit that those things, or whatever that's going on there. And, I love that Skye encourages us not to mask things like our sin or our anger or our fear.
And I think that's a really good point, is that when we try to hide something in our life we know is not right, it prevents us from dealing with it. We don't even bring it to God. We don't ask for his help. We just pretend like he doesn't see, and we're really just deluding ourselves. And then if we actually get to the point where we can be authentic and real and express all those emotions to God, admit if we are doing something that's maybe addictive or some other kind of behavior that is bad, or even just your thoughts or your intentions or your attitude sometimes can just be bad. When we bring those things honestly before God and ask for his help, then I think that's where true transformation and growth can happen.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so important. And I love the doodle actually at the beginning of this chapter, with two people with an elephant in between them. And one, is talking about, let's talk about the elephant, and the other one is denying his existence.
Its existence, yeah.
Because my thought is just like, how awkward and superficial is that conversation going to become at that point?
Yep, exactly.
And like, if we start to avoid those things, I think if we're really honest with ourselves, the fruit will eventually, we just will stop praying. Or we'll do a misdirection, kind of the idea of like, kind of like we've talked before, like, look at all the wonderful things I'm doing. Keep looking at that. Keep looking at all the good things that I'm doing. Keep your eyes focused on that. And just there's that thing that is unspoken that is just evident.
Yeah. And I think even if you don't stop praying, which I think it really can happen for lots of people, if we just avoid avoid that, being honest, then it just keeps your relationship with God very shallow and superficial.
Yep.
So I think
Well,
we're encouraged to be really real here,
yeah.
and just I even like the part in Jeremiah where he's told to tell the people a very awkward message, and they hate him for it, and he gets mad at God for telling him to tell him.
Yeah.
So God is big enough to accept all of those things from us and see His will accomplished anyway.
Yeah, and I love the quote at the end of this chapter. We will lift even our disobedience into the arms of the Father. He is strong enough to carry the weight. Sin, to be sure, separates us from God, but trying to hide our sin separates us all the more.
That's sums it
And
up.
so, yeah, we need to, even though it can feel wrong, we need to give the ugly truths, the disappointments, and even the anger. We need to really give that God. And I love the fact that that's throughout the Bible, and it really puts us in some great company to know that.
It really does. If people sometimes get this fake idea that the Bible is all about really great people that did great things, and some great things were done, but usually the people were very, very
really flawed people.
So we can really relate to that as humans. So thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you found this review of these chapters helpful and that you're reading along in the book. And if you need a copy of the book, please let us know. And if you look in the show notes today, there'll be some link to some questions where you can review these ideas and concepts. And it always helps to kind of review things afterwards. And hopefully the questions will provoke some more thoughts and ideas. And we always find it helpful if we do that with other people. And we encourage people in our church community to get together with friends or their missional community and review these questions and just have a discussion about it and allow these thoughts to really penetrate into our lives and affect our prayer life. As we've been saying all along here, we can learn an awful lot about prayer, and we can be kind of astonished by some new ideas we haven't had before. But if it doesn't actually lead us to pray, then it really doesn't have much benefit for us. So we would encourage you to do that. So thanks again for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us again for our next video.